Alright, so for the latest update video, we're going to start with a couple director's titles. This, of course, directed by Frank Capra, the MGM UA reissue of Arsenic and Old Lace. This following the Criterion version. I think this came from 92 or 93, and the Criterion was 91. There's an earlier analog-only disc. And this uses the similar image of Cary Grant in the window seat for the film as the Criterion version, which was black and white. So again, this is sort of a coloring of stills like MGM is very fond of doing, and then place different characters and shots over the cover. And it looks pretty nice. It's just not as striking as the black and white Criterion jacket. Of course, this has digital sound just like the Criterion. A little bit of corner crumpling, but not bad. A pretty nice rear cover though. I like the image choices, and here you get one of the film's original lobby posters there, so that's a nice touch. Again, just a single disc, movie only, no trailer or special features. So pretty much this replicates the Criterion version. I haven't sat down and I haven't had time to really do a complete side-by-side comparison, but I'm pretty sure it's the same element. MGM was pretty common to it was pretty common for MGM to just put out a disc later, I guess after the Criterion license expired, and then just do it themselves. So it may be a little bit sharper, or it may be just the exact same transfer. So I'm definitely going to check that out and compare, because I adore this film. It's just one of those dark comedies that's just a madcap ride, and pretty much everybody in the film is just going at level 11, going full tilt. So can't recommend it highly enough, and it makes a great Halloween feature, since the film changes the play. I think the play is set at a different time, and the film changes it to be at Halloween. Next up is the Lone Hitchcock addition to the library. This is the Universal Signature Collection release of the restored Vertigo. Beautiful, beautiful shape. I've got this one in mint condition. I've wanted to get this for a long time because I've always adored the Saul Bass artwork, and just the thought of that on a signature jacket made me happy. So just beautiful, worth it for the jacket alone. Really nice cardboard and a gorgeous gatefold. Here you have the classic Hitchcock profile photo with the printed signature of not only Hitchcock, but his daughter, Patricia Hitchcock O'Connell, who has been pretty much a champion of her father's work and has been a real source of information for decades. And then you also have the signatures of You also have the signatures of Robert Harris and James Katz, who were the film's restorers, and then later went on to do another photochemical restoration and saving of Rear Window in 2000. Now the liner notes are just wonderful. They're well printed, and they're very small because there's a lot. These are pretty much a lot of, actually pretty much all of them are certain quotes from cast, crew, and the restorers, and just printed beautifully. Now the film makes it onto, I believe, yeah, it's the first 3 sides of the film, and then side 4 is the supplements. Most of those made it over onto the DVDs, and then I think 1 or 2 features got dropped from the last DVD and the Blu-ray, unfortunately. Now, again, this is based on the 1996 photochemical restoration, which was absolutely staggering, especially when you see it in theaters. But unfortunately, it carries the 5.1 soundtrack remix with the brand new Foley effects that the studio insisted upon, which is not really accurate historically, and it really doesn't work for the film very well. So you will have to keep that in mind if you're interested in this release. Now, this does carry that new restoration mix in 5.1 AC3 and a matrixed Dolby Pro Logic PCM track. And then there is a commentary on the other analog track that carried over onto the first DVDs as well. So again, you'd have to have the earlier DVDs and the Blu-ray to have every special feature, or you can pick this up. Unfortunately, it does not have the original mono track, which is only on select DVDs, and a lossy track on the Blu-ray. There's also a DTS version out there. I think it drops all the features because it isn't a signature disc. It's just the feature in DTS. And of course, that's absurdly rare and expensive. But what they did very nicely was they used the entirety of the jacket for the Saul Bass artwork, I wish they'd done here, because you can see how bold the entire rear is in the orange background color. But the signature jacket looks really nice. It's really nice sturdy cardboard, and this is in mint shape. So I'm very happy to add it to the collection because I like the earlier transfers of photochemical restorations. They look really nice, and even though the HD Master is slightly better than the DVDs and fixes some of their problems, I'm still not 100% happy with it, and neither is Robert Harris himself. So until Universal gets around to fixing their Hitchcock library, which is woefully neglected, especially in HD, I'm still just picking up older versions of Hitchcock classics just to compare and add them to the ever-growing Hitchcock shelf. Next up is one of John Huston's great works. This is The Misfits, an MGM UA release. Again, sort of color tinting stills and moving them around to make a pretty attractive cover, I must say. Of course, the film is black and white, so don't let the color images fool you. It carries a digital PCM mono track and is a gatefold release. So you can see this being a slightly older disc. It goes back to the MGM style of using color tinted black and white stills and just putting them willy-nilly across a gatefold. And, you know, it looks nice enough, and the stills are great and represent the film well, but, you know, you wish you'd get some text or the chapter listings, you know, where you could actually read it, or, you know, something besides just images, or don't just throw them all over the place randomly. But it works, and at least these are more black and white-ish, because the film is a very, very bleak black and white drama. Again, the rear carries on with the color-tinted still motif, but here it works a bit better. As you can see, they added sort of a grooved pattern to all of them, I guess, to suggest the desperate nature of these characters. I don't know. But the rear is pretty nice. So again, just a title I wanted to pick up to check out the transfer and the digital soundtrack. Of course, this film's available on DVD, and the Blu-ray is pretty decent. Unfortunately, no one's ever done a giant special edition of this film, which it really deserves. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's one of Huston's great works, and the last film of both Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe. And that, combined with their performances, the performance of Monty Clift, who's always great in everything. It's just a very hard-hitting, dreary, dark film that's definitely not a pick-me-up. Next up is one I wanted to pick up simply for the jacket. It's just gorgeous. This is the final release of Dr. Zhivago on Laserdisc. This is the AC3 CLV reissue. Pretty much slims down the CAV box set transfer minus a lot of the extras, but it adds an AC3 track. As that was pretty common with a lot of MGM UA films. They get a box set in CAV, like Thunderball, for example, and then about 2 years later, they got a movie-only CLV version, and that gives you AC3. So 2001's the same way. If you wanted AC3, you just had to buy the whole movie over again. This uses a segment of original artwork on a white background and just looks gorgeous. The DVD also stuck with this for the main 2-disc set, and unfortunately the later Blu-ray, while it's okay, it doesn't have this great artwork. So this is definitely, I'd actually argue this is the best cover for the film on video. You get the later style MGM letterbox banner across the top. It looks very classy. It's kind of a nicer cardboard than usual too. And here you can see MGM stepped up their game with a gatefold. The image is there randomly on the side, but the overarching image spells out the film's title and a really nice background image across the entirety of the gatefold. Now here you have the chapter listings. Again, this drops all of the special features of the box set. Thankfully, those were all put in that DVD release, which you can pick up for literally nothing. I'd actually argue, I can't decide whether I like this or the DVD, you know, Warner Brothers split box 2-disc fold-out package better. I kind of flip-flop between the two, but the box set is also nice. But what happened with the box set was it got the sort of MGM airbrush style design of art, whereas this reissue got the actual art, which I much prefer. So as nice as the box set look, I think the art is better on the AC3 reissue. Now the rear cover is pretty nice, and this background image is the one they used for the first letterbox disc. Of course, this being from '97, it's actually pressed and made by Image, so they were already taking over things. It still carries the same Dolby Surround PCM track from the earlier releases. The big benefit is having the AC3 rendering, which is a really nice AC3 track. I really need to sit down with all the different versions and kind of go through them. This being a big roadshow film designed for stereophonic multi-track sound, the AC3 is going to be really important. But I know some people do actually prefer the Dolby Surround on this release for this film for some reason, so I really need to sit down and just double check it. But all in all, a really nice disc, probably the best version out there on Laserdisc. The first letterbox version is really noisy in its video quality, and even though the box set is CAV, this one should be roughly about equal because it is a later release and it does add AC3, so you do get that benefit without having to get up and change sides so many times. Next up, the Sergio Leone edition for this time around. I did manage to pick up the standalone Fistful of Dollars letterbox release with the custom artwork. I'd got this to match the other two standalone releases of the Dollars trilogy, just to have them side by side instead of having the disc only in the box set. So pretty nice art, and this was pretty much used on all the tape releases around this era. Looks really nice. You get the thicker letterbox bar on the top. Of course, it's a letterbox transfer with digital PCM mono. It's the same disc as what you get in the Clint Eastwood trilogy box set of the 3 films. And again, a more standard MGM style rear cover of artwork. And again, what's nice about this disc, it takes the MGM Vault element and transfers it straight with no noise filtering on the English mono. So I'd actually argue the PCM on this disc, both single and in the box set, is about the best the English dub is going to sound, period. I think it sounds better than a lot of the other releases. The first DVD ported this master. That's why it was a very early non-anamorphic DVD with a lossy mono track. So you can actually get this master in DVD quality. You just pick up that first DVD for like less than $1. It's dirt cheap because it's the very first one. But just keep in mind it's still an early DVD that's non-anamorphic. Later on, it was remastered, and the video quality improved, but it wasn't that great. And then the eventual Italian restoration has the the second Italian restoration. The first one was in 2007 and was fine. That got released to Blu-ray in Italy and Germany. You can still get the German region-free one, which is the best Blu-ray of the film. Get it in the double feature set with for a few dollars more. They're both region free, and that will get you set on the first 2 films pretty well. Then the second Italian restoration in about 2014 has all of the massive color problems of the Good, Bad, and the Ugly fiasco color timing situation. So the Kino Lorber disc of that, the Blu-ray of that, is just awful. Just avoid that at all costs in terms of picture quality. So again, the Laserdisc is still important for a lot of reasons. Of course, in the US, they didn't have access to the Fistful negative because this is the one film that isn't 100% owned by United Artists / eventually MGM. So they had to use the US elements. So it will look a tiny bit different if you compare it to the Italian restorations. So it is a great Laserdisc, though. I would highly recommend it, and you can get it single, standalone, or in the box set. So that's why I picked this up, to have it to match the other 2. Next up is the Lone Criterion edition. This is number 78A. This is the reissue of Lawrence of Arabia, and this is one of the random Criterion CLV reissues that actually has extras, whereas the CAV original does not. Why this is, nobody knows, but you have to keep in mind, if you want the extras on Lawrence, you're going to have to get the CAV box set, which is prone to having some rot issues. I think it has 1 or 2 extras on there, but then all the rest of the extras are actually on this CLV version. So the CLV goes with a light greenish color, whereas the CAV version is sort of the beige of desert sand, so that helps you differentiate between the 2. Of course, this one is just a nice simple gatefold. gorgeously using imagery from the desert, and it does seem to kind of try to be framed in something close to the original 2.21 to 1 ratio of Super Panavision 70. And here on the side, you have 3 widescreen images taken from the film. Again, it seems like they tried to keep the ratio for that, so that's really, really impressive for the time period. Now the rear, of course, you get your Criterion SA, your Criterion block of materials. The special features include newsreel footage, footage of the premiere, footage dedicating, and some text slides dedicated to talking about the 30th anniversary 1989 restoration done by Robert Harris and James Katz. It's pretty much what saved the film and allowed them to do further work after preserving it. And then you get the Wind, Sand, and Star vintage documentary piece that's about the making of the film and its release, and is kind of a promotional piece that would have been made around that time period. If you've ever seen a vintage featurette from the 60s and 70s, you kind of know what to expect then. And of course, most of these little pieces have been replicated on the DVDs and the Blu-ray, so there's nothing really exclusive to this outside of the Criterion transfer, which this CLV is a repress of the CAV transfer. They did it from the 1989 restoration source, and they did a Dolby Pro Logic matrixed PCM track based on the brand new 1989 6-track mix based on the original 1962 6-track mix. So you are getting the exclusive Criterion transfer, the little spattering of extras, and you can pick one of these up for pretty cheap and not have to worry about flipping sides or having discs with rot. And you can't have too many copies of what is arguably the greatest film ever made either. So just to put my 2 cents in there. All right, so next up are the few Westerns that I picked up. Now this one's pretty uncommon. This is a Universal double feature, like the Anthony Mann double feature that I have on the shelf. This is of the Marlon Brando film, The Appaloosa, and My Name is Nobody, which is interesting because it's the quasi-Sergio Leone Western that he produced, starring Henry Fonda and Terence Hill of the Trinity films. But it was directed by somebody else. I think it was Tonio Valeri who directed it. But some people have wondered whether Leone's input meant that perhaps he ghost directed. It's pretty much one of the only other films where people still debate, like Poltergeist. Did the producer on the set who had a lot of ideas, did he technically direct scenes, or did the actual director technically direct? And people go back and forth. So, but it is an interesting film that's not too often discussed. And this is a really nice, uncommon release from Universal. Again, nice liner notes, a panel devoted to each film. Each film gets a single disc. It fits onto 2 sides, and each one has the theatrical trailer at the end. So a really nice release, and the first time these films were presented in letterbox. My Name is Nobody did come out on DVD from Image, and I know the Appaloosa did, but they're not very common. And then I think there are some foreign Blu-ray releases, but I think it's a mix of reviews. I know My Name is Nobody floats around in different versions because any Italian Western practically will, particularly Leone films, or anything associated with Leone. So I wanted to pick up this Laserdisc because it has PCM mono and letterbox transfers, and because I've never actually gotten to see the Appaloosa, and I'd picked up a copy before locally I was happy to find, but unfortunately it had molded, so I had to return it. And then thankfully I found this from one of the group sellers pretty quickly, and I'm like, wow, that's a quick turnaround. In fact, all of these discs came from the same group seller, so when it rains, it pours when you're looking for stuff you need. Next up are 3 John Wayne titles. This from Fox, the widescreen collector's edition of the Comancheros, which is pretty important because it does have an exclusive audio commentary that's only on the Laserdisc for some reason, even though the DVD ports this transfer exactly. It carries a digital stereo track because apparently this film did get stereo engagements, and has a nice cover with a gatefold even though it's a single disc. Tons of really nice liner notes, beautiful jacket design. Again, one of the best I've actually seen. This is a Fox disc, so this is one of the best Fox gatefolds out there. Beautiful aesthetic artwork, really nice liner notes that are very informative. Then you get the cast listing and then the chapter index. Again, single disc, 2 sides, and then at the end of side 2, you get the special features section that's listed as the collector section. You get the theatrical trailer, publicity stills, production stills, behind the scenes materials, some text slides about the film. You even get sheet music, publicity materials. So I think this is Fox really trying to do a Criterion style disc and just putting it out there under the radar. And they really nailed it. This is a great release. And again, it carries an exclusive audio commentary. Again, you could sort of recognize this as a Fox disc here. It's just not gray on the background, so at least they were finally trying. And it carries the motif of the gatefold, so beautifully done. It's really important for the commentary. I know some people, it's floating around online if you really want to hear it. But this disc is not super expensive, and it has a nice stereo PCM track. So I think this was the first time the film was in stereo again after the early video releases. Of course, being a CinemaScope film, this would be ProLogic encoded because CinemaScope was capable of 4-track magnetic audio, meaning left, center, right, surround. So decoded in ProLogic, it should sound perfect. So that's what this should represent. And even though the DVD is the same transfer, it lacks all the extras and the PCM of this release. So very highly recommended and really nice exclusive stuff for pretty cheap. Next up, from 1965, this is the Paramount release of The Sons of Katie Elder. Next up, from 1965, is the Paramount release of The Sons of Katie Elder. This is, again, one of the widescreen reissues they were doing. I have the similar one they did of The Shootist. This disc is from '96, pressed by Pioneer, and carries the cover from the VHS, which is why it's, of course, sized for tape. At least has a nice sort of wood grain motif. No special features, unlike the last disc, but at least they were getting it out in widescreen with its original PCM mono track. And again, these Paramount widescreen reissues are really nice and wipe the floor with all the earlier pan and scan discs. And then their DVDs are pretty much going to be ports of these later release Laserdiscs. So very highly recommended, and they have really great PCM audio. Next up, from 1970, is the Warner Brothers release of Chisholm. This is widescreen, and they've actually printed it on the front very nicely. Pretty nice cover image too, and well printed. So it's a much nicer jacket than is typically found on Warner Brothers discs. Now the rear is pretty standard. Again, scope widescreen, and it does have a PCM track. I believe this is also mono. And again, no real special features. In fact, I think there aren't any. Yeah, what it is, the few songs in the film are listed in italics. So you have the main theme at the beginning and end, and then the alternate themes here in parentheses. So again, just a nice movie-only release. The first time it was available in widescreen with great PCM audio. So again, this is Warner Brothers actually stepping up to the plate and doing these titles justice, really, on Laserdisc, even if they're not full-on special editions or crammed with extra features or anything. Next up, we move on to regular releases by year. We start with one I've tried to find for years. It's not fully rare, but it is quite difficult to find, and it is important because this is the film's only official video release of quality. This is Erich von Stroheim's immortal 1924 silent masterpiece Greed, that was, of course, famously butchered and became one of the great crimes of the cinema, where the original 8-hour version was absolutely destroyed by MGM, and then the eventual 4-hour version was cut apart and lost. So this represents an attempt to at least get something closer to the original version out there on video. This is the 2-hour and 13-minute version, and presented on Laserdisc in the Silent Classics line. It was also put out on VHS tape at this time period. But after this point, it's for some unknown reason never seen a DVD release. There was a reconstruction of the 4-hour version shown on Turner Classic Movies, primarily one of those efforts where it uses a lot of stills to recreate the 4-hour version, much like the recreation of the Lost London After Midnight. So if you've ever seen that, there's a similar version of Greed out there. Unfortunately, that's never been officially released on disc. Hopefully that means somebody will be working on a Blu-ray at some point. This is a film that needs to be seen more often, even in its truncated short versions. And, you know, it's one of those legendary lost titles that every film archivist or film historian dreams of someday finding pieces of, if not the whole thing. So anyway, the Laserdisc is pretty important, even though it is the shorter version. Now, it does have this nice gatefold, which is pretty good for MGM in this style of just throwing images around. I do like the putting of the title here and then the 3 main characters. It does look pretty nice, I must admit. And the rear is pretty much like an earlier, late 80s, early 90s MGM disc in terms of layout. And it does carry a, I can't remember who did the score on this one. It's on the Laserdisc database, I think, who did it. But unfortunately, this is right before they switched to doing digital sound on all their releases. So this does have analog-only sound. It is still stereo, but it is the, you know, shorter 2-hour, 13-minute version with analog stereo. So you will have to keep that in mind if you're like me and you love the digital tracks. Unfortunately, this just didn't make it over. But like another silent classic, King Vidor's The Crowd, which also came out in this line of Laserdisc, has not been released on DVD at all. So the Laserdisc is important, if only to have the only official release. Next up is a sci-fi landmark classic from 1957. This is the Universal Encore Edition release of The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is one of those films, if you see it as a child, you never forget it. Based on the classic Richard Matheson story, the tale of one man shrunk down to an unfathomable size and how ordinary dangers become absolute life and death terrors. Wonderful cover art here for an Encore edition, by the way. It does have digital sound, and this is a 1:3:3 transfer. This is a flat widescreen film, so it does seem a bit opened up, and it was always shown 1:3:3 on tape and television for years until the I think the DVD is in widescreen, and then it finally did get a Blu-ray release from, I think it's Arrow in the UK who did it. It's a British release. I think it's Arrow who did it. Unfortunately, there's no good American release of this film, which is a darn shame. And hopefully it does get, you know, the 4K treatment at some point, because it is one of those sci-fi classic landmarks, and it is a really well-made, intelligent film. It is not, you know, one of the cheesy, dumb, silly 50s sci-fi films that you usually think of, and it's one of those with real lasting power. Partially due to Matheson being one of the great, you know, science fiction fantasy writers, but, you know, Jack Arnold being a strong director when properly motivated, and the film just really works. And it's especially one, if you show kids, they're probably going to get freaked out a little bit. But just wonderful, wonderful, nice encore release. Moving up to 1970, this is the MGM UA letterbox release of Kelly's Heroes. I kind of wanted this after having such a good time with the Where Eagles Dare release. And of course, really nice artwork, looks fantastic. This copy's in mint shape, and it has the thicker deluxe letterbox banner on the top. Carries a ProLogic encoded PCM track. Really nice gatefold. For once, MGM actually uses a whole image, gives you a quote from the film's tagline, and then the central characters in sort of a bullet hole pattern. So it's a really nice gatefold. I'd argue one of the really good MGM ones. And then the rear is a standardized MGM gold bar design. I call it that because they kept the letterbox gold bar on the back. Now, there's no real special features here. It's just the transfer and is letterbox finally, and it does carry the original trailer, so at least they gave you that. And then It also, again, has a nice PCM track, so I'm interested to check out this disc because, again, I was very pleased with the Where Eagles Dare disc that has the exclusive British Roadshow version from the limited 70mm British Roadshow prints of that film. So I'm interested to see this and check out the audio as well. So really nice disc, and it seems like MGM put more effort into this title. Next up, from 1981, is the Peter Weir film Gallipoli, and again, a nice letterbox Paramount jacket. They also released this in pan and scan, and then there's also one of those later on Paramount remastered widescreen versions of this, but it's quite rare and it just drops the black bar on the top. I don't know if it's much better than this, but this is just a film I'd been meaning to see all the way through for ages. I've seen pieces of it, and I love Mel Gibson in most anything, so I wanted to see, you know, one of his earlier films. And I've caught pieces of this on cable through the years, so I've always meant to get around to seeing it. And since the only Blu-ray is from overseas and the DVD over here isn't that great, I figured why not pick it up on Laserdisc. It's of course letterboxed, no special features, and carries a PCM track. I want to say this is actually mono, but I'm not for sure if this got a Dolby Stereo release in theater, so I'll find out when I pop the disc in. But it's either mono or ProLogic Matrix Stereo. But yeah, so this is a pretty common Paramount disc. I just have been meaning to find a clean one and just finally got around to it. Next up is a film I've been meaning to catch up with for an extremely long time, and I've been saying I'm finally going to do it, so I finally picked up the widescreen edition of Dune from Universal. Of course, this being the David Lynch adaptation, produced by Dino De Laurentiis, and this carries a really boisterous, bombastic AC3 5.1 track. So I really wanted to finally see this and eventually read the book too, so I figured the Laserdisc would be a good place to start because everybody swears the AC3 track is really great. So I'm excited to check this out. Really nice looking jacket here with original artwork. A lot better than some of the later releases, which are just, you know, Photoshop jobs. And of course, there are different cuts and various other editions later on with tons of extras. So this is just if you want the best US version of the movie on Laserdisc with a, and you get the bonus of having both an AC3 track and a Dolby ProLogic PCM track. Outside of the theatrical trailer, there's no extras on here, so it's just a 3-sided CLV disc, but it's supposed to have a really good transfer too, so I'll be excited to fire this up. And even though it's not rare or anything, it can usually go for a bit more than just a standard Universal disc because it's Dune letterboxed, it has AC3, and it is kind of a later transfer. I think this disc is from about 96 or so. But all in all, a nice looking release from Universal, and I'm finally glad I'm going to catch up with this one. Next up, from 1987, is the Fox letterbox release of Predator, and this one has it's got a really nice gloss to it. It's an extremely glossy jacket. Of course, as you can see, it carries the Fox Video logo. Of course, as you can see, it carries the Fox Video logo. So this is a later pressing, I think, from at least 91 or 92 or so. Get this off there. But otherwise, it's in the standard Fox style jacket with the black bars creating a letterbox, and it takes a section of the film's original one-sheet poster. So it looks really nice on a Laserdisc jacket, and the thick gloss really, really helps. It looks very nice. Now, the rear has a ton of nice liner notes. It's pretty much like if you took what was normally in a Fox gatefold at this time and crammed it all on the back side, because this is just a single CLV movie-only disc. So as nice as this looks, unfortunately there's no special features or anything. So this is just a nice movie-only disc with a good solid letterbox transfer, and it has the original Dolby Stereo mix in digital PCM. So it looks and sounds great for the format, and it's still a really solid release. The first DVD was pretty much a port of this, if I'm remembering correctly, and then the first couple Blu-rays had the infamous ultimate DNR fiasco where pretty much all the film grain was taken out. So it looks like, at least on the new modern 4K release, that's been addressed. But if you're wanting to pick this up on Laserdisc, or you just want a really nice version of this film, this is what you're going to be going out for, because this is pretty much the only one that's good letterbox transfer. And again, just like with Dune, it's not particularly rare, but because it's a, you know, well-beloved film of this genre, it can usually cost you a bit more than just a standard disc. This is a little underrated film from 1989. This is the letterboxed edition of The Fabulous Baker Boys, and I really like the cover art. It's very classy and represents the film perfectly. This is a release from Live Home Entertainment, so I haven't really, this one isn't super common. I think the first version was Pan and Scan, and then this one came out, I think, in about 95 or so, but you don't see it pop up very often. This is a great little film if you've never seen it. It's got a great cast. It's just a nice little drama. It has a Dolby Surround PCM track, which represents the Dolby Stereo of the original release. No AC3 on this because, of course, it predated 5.1. No special features, just a nice letterbox transfer of this film, and it's a nice little jacket. I think the front covers are really good, and I would definitely recommend this one. But most of the times you're going to come across, I think the main one is like an older Pan and Scan disc. So this is basically replacing that, and because it was made in '95, it just doesn't pop up that often. So I'll be excited to spin this up. I haven't seen this in at least a good number of years, but I really did enjoy it the first time. So it's always nice when you can pick up letterbox copies of films. That being said, here is another one where the letterbox version is much more difficult to find. This is the widescreen director's cut reissue of Pretty Woman, which takes the one-sheet artwork and puts a widescreen banner on top. This replaces the earlier Pan and Scan disc, and this also gets a, if you can look right down here, there's a very tiny THX mastering stamp, so it gets the THX seal of approval, which again, I don't really know why that would be on this type of film, but it's always interesting to see what they would put their stamp on. And you also have the digital sound Dolby Surround indicators and the fact that this is stereo, and given that logo, you can tell pretty quickly that this is a Disney disc since it's a Touchstone film, I believe. Now, you do get a gatefold, which is pretty nice. Some nice imagery and stills chosen. Now, the film is spread onto 3 sides, and I don't think there's any extra features afterwards. I think the director's cut of this, it goes a bit longer. I want to say it's about 10 minutes or so, and I think some of these were presented as deleted scenes on later releases, but I don't know if they were incorporated into a full director's cut on any other versions. So yeah, the runtime of this is 2 hours 5 minutes, and like I said, I don't exactly know off the top of my head exactly how many more minutes this director's cut is, but I want to say it's maybe about 10, maybe 15. I'm not for certain. But yeah, this one pops up very, very infrequently, and I don't know why. But yeah, you usually find the earlier Pan and Scan one. So when I saw this, I was like, I had to double take for a second. It's like, no, that is the widescreen one. So again, you get a Dolby Surround PCM track, which should represent the original release audio perfectly, because again, this predates 5.1 in any form. Letterbox to 185 as said here, and then the analog track has a audio commentary by the director, so that's really the only special feature. Special feature being that you get a longer director's cut and you get a director's commentary on the analog tracks. So nice little release, pretty difficult to track down, and can go for quite a, well, at least a decent bit on the Laserdisc market and eBay and stuff. So definitely pick it up if you actually stumble across it. Keeping with 90s films being reissued, this is the letterboxed reissue of The Crow that adds AC3 5.1. This one is a lot less common than the standard ProLogic 2.0 only disc that came out first. Even though it has the same cover, it adds this little triangle here that says, it's an exclusive bonus program entitled History of the Crow. And as you can see, it adds the Dolby Digital moniker here with the THX moniker here. But the other difference with the jacket is that it's actually kind of got a matte finish to it. So it feels a lot more fancy in your hands as opposed to the original one. So if you're ever in a store or you're looking at a bin of Laserdiscs and you're trying to remember off the top of your head which one has AC3, those are going to be the indicators to go by, because otherwise the jacket is the same. It's got the same transfer as the previous disc, and it has the same 2.0 PCM Dolby Surround, both of which are excellent for the format. And the sound mix on this film is really aggressive for the time, and it's a really great listen in the 2.0 matrix. And this AC3 I've demoed a little bit, and it sounds just as good. I don't really know if I'd say one's better than the other, but you do get the discrete channel usage here. It's a really great mix for the time, and this is, this became a cult film for a lot of reasons, but it still really works. Now, the jacket is pretty much the same on the rear as the original release, except for Chapter 19 at the end of Side 2 is the History of the Crow bonus program, which is basically a featurette press kit thing made around the time of the film's release. And then, of course, they've added the THX stamp and the Dolby Digital stamp here with a little tiny blurb about making sure you do AC3 correctly. But I would highly recommend this one. I think even the regular one is a great Laserdisc on all fronts, pretty much. I think it's one of those nice cheap discs that you can find that's a nice reference title to make sure that your video and audio performance are good and up to par, as good as it could be on your setup. But this AC3 disc gives you the bonus feature and the AC3 track, so it is an improvement on all fronts. And if you're willing to dig around, you can usually find it for pretty cheap. Some people will charge more because they know what they have, but it shouldn't cost you a whole lot more. It's kind of like trying to find the version of Speed that adds AC3 and looks almost identical to the first version that's much more common. It's not exactly rare, it's just more difficult to find because it mixes in with all the others. So definitely highly recommended. Of course, there's also a DTS version, but that's insanely rare and absurdly expensive. And then there's the various DVDs and Blu-rays out there with all the other extras and things. So this is really a nice improvement over the first one, and I would recommend it. But of course, there are later, supposedly greater releases out there. And if you have the original disc, this can really just be, if you actually find one, you can try it out and see if you like it better with the AC3 track. But a really nice disc. Took me a little while to find. Now, last up for the regular releases, this is a 1997 film, the Warner Brothers release of Conspiracy Theory. Really nice usage of the original poster artwork, and the original owner had stuck the Dolby Digital sticker on the cover here off of the shrink wrap, so that's pretty cool. And as you can see, Warner Brothers was finally marking these titles were widescreen and actually kind of printing it bigger so you knew it was actually widescreen. And as usual, they just shoved this into a thin single piece of cardboard, so it's got some ring wear and some corner crumpling and stuff, but not bad for what usually happens when one of these discs gets kicked around all this time. And so this being a 97 film, this disc is a 1998 disc, and that means it's been handed off to Image Entertainment, pretty much like what everybody else was doing at the time. It's 3 sides, with side 3 being CAV. No special features or anything, but you do get a Dolby Pro Logic track in addition to a Dolby AC3 5.1 track, and it's a nice late release, so you can pick it up for quite little. So it's one of those late releases that you can get just to check it out and not have to pay a lot of money, and you also get an AC3 disc that way as well to work with your demodulator, or if you're trying to build up a nice little shelf of AC3 titles. So I do definitely recommend it. This came out on DVD pretty quickly in the format, so I think it's a port of this old master. And eventually it came to Blu-ray a lot later on, and it's a really nice Blu-ray as well. So there is a nice HD version out there on Blu-ray if you're so inclined, but this is a nice late release Laserdisc you can pick up for dirt cheap, so definitely recommend it. Now moving on to 2 box sets that I picked up from this seller. This is one I've been after for a while, and it was such a good price that I couldn't pass it up. And so the box is, you know, it's a bit worn and beat up, but for the price I paid and the weight of this thing, I didn't mind. This is the CAV release of Gone with the Wind. It's the same transfer as the standard black cover CLV one that came in 2 or 3 varieties with a gatefold. You can tell the difference being that this gets printed with the Deluxe Collector's Edition banner, and that it's got the red background and of course is in a box because it's CAV encoded. And it uses the famous reissue artwork that's probably the definitive imagery for the film. I really like this. I wish it was in better shape, but I've wanted to check this out for the CAV transfer for a good number of years. But I didn't want to have to pay a ton of money just for another box set of Gone with the Wind, because I already have plenty of copies. So I just always meant to pick one up if I ever found it for cheap, which this was. And the rear is pretty much the standard MGM style of the time. Now, the making of documentary is not included with this. It was released on a separate Laserdisc, so you'll still have to pick that up if you really want to check that out on Laserdisc. But of course, the reason why you had to have a thick box for this is because the entire film is presented in CAV. So it's pretty much a lot like the CAV box set version of Ben-Hur, so you need to be prepared for a marathon session of side flipping. When you take the top off, you get a really nice custom jacket. And when you take the top off, you get a really nice booklet here, printed with the same imagery, but given sort of a memory box motif, I guess you'd say. Really nicely done. Great imagery. Pretty much replicates some of the text that's on the standalone CLV disc, but of course you get a bit more because it's the booklet with some really nice imagery and printing. Again, with these booklets, you could really tell which films MGM was putting more effort into instead of just cranking them out and slapping them in a box set of discs. Now here you get technical notes about the cleanup done for the 50th anniversary, and then the processing they did to get this Laserdisc and actually try and achieve the best possible results in the realm of video in 1991-92. And then here you get really nice liner notes written for the 1989 50th anniversary. And again, the paper quality, stock, everything on here is really, really well done. And here you get all of the chapters, and as you can see, it's quite exceptionally long because, as I said, the entire film is presented CAV. It makes it onto, let's see, yeah, it goes right over onto side 9, and then the supplemental features start, which is pretty much a mixture of newsreels, trailers, and then reissue trailers with also footage of the premiere, and then a nice program of some stills with also included some foreign release version samples. So I think, yes, also at the very end you get highlights from the making of Gone with the Wind documentary, which of course is presented separately. I don't know why they wouldn't have just put it in here. Maybe they just didn't have room to shove an extra disc in here, but they'll give you a small highlight reel of that and then encourage you to buy yet another Laserdisc. And here is the credit summary page. Now, at the very bottom, you'll note that they also presented the film's music and effects track isolated on the analog right channel, so that is a nice bonus. So the original mono mix was cleaned up and presented on the digital mono track, and it's probably the best presentation of the film's original mono that exists because all of the DVD and Blu-ray versions have a lossy Dolby Digital track. Then the analog left will have an analog mono, and then the analog right thus carries the isolated score and effects track. So that's a nice touch. And inside, of course, you have a big box of MGM discs. So As you can see, there's a lot in here, so most of these you're going to find with some busted seams. Now, this one is no exception, but it is a darn good presentation of this film at the time period, and is about the best they could do. After this, the only other version was the final 1998 late release that was based around the 1998-99 theatrical reissue that was an attempt to bring back the full luster of original dye transfer Technicolor elements and prints, which had a theatrical run with a brand new 5.1 audio mix by Chase Audio. That later came out on a very early DVD, but the audio was remixed. So if you pick up that late release, it should be very good picture quality with the theatrical 5.1. But the theatrical 5.1 later resurfaced on the Blu-ray, so that's available much easier if you don't want to go to the trouble of tracking down that Laserdisc. But that being said, it should still be pretty comparable to this CAV version, which I've sampled this and the CLV version, and they're both excellent for the time period. So this is still a very valid way of watching this film. And again, I'd still argue that the digital mono on here is the best sounding release of any copy of this film, because all the later ones switched to having a lossy Dolby Digital track. So really nice box set, and very happy to finally pick it up to check out the transfer. Now, last but not least is a box set I've wanted to look at for a very long time. It's kind of a later release because it is from 1996 or so, but it is the Republic repackaging of It's a Wonderful Life and the 50th anniversary box set, with the green motif banner that was also used on the simultaneous VHS tape, which was the first copy I owned as a kid. So this looks very familiar and very nice to my eyes because I'm so used to the old tape copy. So again, it's pretty much reusing the transfer they made before, but it spiffs it up and gives it the box set treatment. And here you have a nice image, but the original little insert is still taped on, which is cool because a lot of times those would get torn up or lost and stuff. So you get the transfer of the older disc from about 92 or so, but again, it has been spiffed up a little bit. And you also get the first appearance of the Making of It's a Wonderful Life little documentary piece that was on all the subsequent Republic editions, and then the Paramount DVD and Blu-ray version. You also get the original trailer, a collector's memorabilia package with lobby cards, production photographs, and then the reproduction of the famous poster. Also included is a CD that's really more of a compilation of holiday favorites and not necessarily the original score, which has been released on one of the specialty soundtrack labels, but unfortunately that's gone out of print, so you'll have to try and track that down and pay high prices if you're a really big fan of the It's a Wonderful Life score. Now, these are not very common, and so I was very happy to see this. The chapters are printed on the inside lid of the box, and as you can see, the film goes onto 3 sides with the trailer and making of at the very end of side 3. So you're looking at a full CLV transfer instead of any CAV sides like the full CAV Criterion. Now, like I said, it's pretty much the same transfer as the prior 45th anniversary Republic Laserdisc, but it does seem maybe like it was spruced up a bit, or the just the pressing quality was better because this was 5 years down the road. But it's not one that you're really going to have to go out and track down just thinking it's going to be the best looking version, period, because I myself would argue that I still prefer the Criterion CAV version, and that's the video edition I've seen that's closest to an actual 35mm print. While the Republic editions are great, I think it's a similar situation to what happened with Casablanca, where the Criterion came out first, is full CAV, is much more filmic, looks exactly like a 35mm fine grain or something you'd see at an art house repertory theater, whereas the MGM Casablanca box set and the Republic It's a Wonderful Life, it's a bit more contrasty, and yes, it's made a couple years later, yes, it has digital sound, but I'd argue the Criterion It's a Wonderful Life actually looks better than either Republic version. But of course, the Republic discs give you digital PCM audio, which is better than the analog-only Criterion audio. Lovely foam insert, of course. Here we have the lobby card reproduction. A lot like their box set of The Quiet Man, extremely well done, well printed, and literally, if it didn't have the copy marks on the bottom, and you could swear this is an actual lobby card. It's so well done. Let me pull the others out. We go with the photograph section. Again, beautifully printed. You'd swear these are original 1946 stills almost. So it's a mixture of photos from the film and on-set photos and publicity stills. Here's a shot of Capra in the director's chair. Again, beautifully printed. Here's one of the more famous publicity stills. And then the pretty typical casting crew shot that would be done on a lot of Capra productions. And you can actually see more of these if you look at the Sony Columbia recent Blu-ray releases of Capra films. They're usually either inside the digibook or inside the included booklet somewhere. So really nice to have a printed version of that. Now here you have a nice Criterion style letter to the viewer and purchaser of this from Frank Capra Jr. So that's another nice touch with the Republic banner on the bottom and then the 50th anniversary logo on the top. And here you have the reproduction poster, which is kind of nice because they actually gave it a sort of desaturated look, which is really exclusive to this. So it is full size, so I'm going to have to try and show you as best I can. But see if I can do this. Show you a panel at a time. Just like the Quiet Man release, this is easily frameable, and I'd actually love to frame it because as you can see, they've given it a desaturated golden look instead of the complete original that was full color. Of course, also was printed in black and white, but this is gorgeous. I love what they did here. And then here is more of the central panel. And as I said, this is pretty much full size, so it is a lot like the poster in the Quiet Man box they made. So exceptional quality here. This is a great example of the kind of stuff that you just won't see in a modern Blu-ray or 4K release. So just fantastic. That folded away. Now you have the discs themselves. Of course, just two because it's three-sided. Now, unfortunately, this one does not have the CD that it's supposed to come with, but it's not really a big loss because it's really just a few tiny selections from the film and then just standard holiday favorites that you could get anywhere else. I wish it was in here for completion's sake, but I'm not going to split hairs seeing as I finally picked this thing up and it's in great shape and I didn't have to pay through the nose for it. So, I wish it was there, but it's not a huge loss. So anyway, this is going to conclude this video update. This is everything I picked up from this seller on the Facebook group. A lot of titles I've been trying to find for a long time, so very happy to find them all in one place and at a nice price. So thanks very much for watching, guys.